Oi, gente, tudo bem? Eu sou a Nina.
Oi, eu sou a Ananda.
E esse é o nosso podcast de Alunos para o Mundo.
Esse é o RELCAST.
E hoje a gente tá aqui. Vai ter uma convidada muito especial. Nosso podcast hoje vai ser um pouco diferente. A gente vai gravar ele em inglês. Então, você que não entende completamente o idioma, não se sente seguro em ouvir sozinho, a gente vai botar a legenda no nosso vídeo do YouTube. E então, acompanhem por lá se vocês tiverem um tempo. A gente vai estar a conversa em geral vai ser em inglês. A gente só tá apresentando aqui pra vocês entenderem um pouco como é que vai funcionar a nossa dinâmica. Quer falar alguma coisa, Nana?
Acho que não.
Então tá tranquilo. Basicamente, só pra vocês entenderem, chequem o nosso YouTube, nossas redes sociais também vai estar tudo por lá. E hoje a gente trouxe aqui 2 convidados pra falar com a gente, e a gente já vai passar pra eles se apresentarem. O primeiro deles é o Rodrigo, que ele já veio aqui, né? Então eu vou passar a palavra pra ele falar um pouco.
Oi, meu nome é Rodrigo, eu sou aluno aqui do IDP e eu vim participar aqui do podcast. Eu já participei de outros episódios, como alguns de vocês já devem ter visto, então espero que a conversa hoje seja bem produtiva.
E é isso, gente. Aí, agora, a partir de agora, todo o nosso podcast vai ser em inglês, que a gente vai passar a palavra pra Erika. Please, Erika, thanks for being here. Talk a little bit about yourself, about what have you done professionally, what's your relation to the theme, and express yourself.
Okay, first of all, thanks for having me here today. It's a real pleasure to participate in this podcast. And also thanks for facilitating in English, which is amazing. I'm happy to contribute to the internationalization program and perspectives of IDP. I'm Erika Capecchi. I'm Italian. I was born in a town near Florence. I'm not going to give you all the background of my life, but yeah, I was born in a town near Florence, which is called Pistoia. It's a tiny town in Tuscany. And my educational background is quite broad. I studied first in Florence, and I studied art history for my bachelor's and postgraduate. And then I decided to move to the UK to continue my specialization. I was always interested also in politics, other than arts. And I ended up in London in 2017 studying a master in art and politics at Goldsmiths University, where I specialized in the study of the aesthetics of politics and especially far-right movements, contemporary far-right movements. After that, I moved to Bristol, where I did my PhD in the School of Modern Languages with Professor John Foote, and I was co-supervised by Professor Kevin Passmore in Cardiff. So it was really a great experience, some of the best years of my life, and I miss Bristol sometimes. But I'm really happy to be here, to be in Brazil, and yeah, I'm here to continue my research because I want to make it more global. So I would like to keep studying the far right, looking at Brazil, Latin America more broadly, and also I'm here to teach. I'm teaching a course in the communication department between communication and political science about the far right and its aesthetics.
That's so good. Thank you for being here again. And today our topic, I guess, as everybody has listened to, is far-right movements, the rise of far-right movement in the world totally. So we're gonna talk a little about United States, Europe, Latin America. I guess it's something that it's rising so fast in the last years, and it's time for everybody to talk about it. I guess I don't see people talking about that much, and it's something that is really important. So the first thing I'd like to ask is, how in your study, how do you see these movements getting so much power lately?
That's a good question, and it's definitely urgent. I'm quite curious actually about the thing that you said, that is something that you don't talk much about, and I'm wondering if it's like in Brazil or like where you talking about something like more in general, because at least in Europe the conversation has been going on quite a lot, and I think now we're just seeing the results of this process of the rise of the new rise, I would say, of far-right movements, because far-right movements have always been there. It's not something new conceptually. So the thing about the rise, at least how I address it in my research, frames far-right movements, or this process of the new rise of far-right movements, as the result of a new process started in the early 2010s. So like after the global economic crisis of 2008. And in my research, I investigate what contributed to make their ideologies and their discourses and narratives mainstream. So how did they end up being, I don't know, legitimated in public discourse? And in my perspective, this is what has contributed in making them more visible and more popular in institutional politics. So now we find ourselves with far-right leaders leading governments. Like in Italy, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, she comes from a tradition from a party who has a very well-known tradition of being post-fascist and far-right. So yeah, like very shortly, this is what I investigate. And in the sense of mainstreaming, which is a concept that has emerged quite a lot, especially in research in the past few years, what has been the process of mainstreaming in the public discourse these ideologies, how they did this. And I personally focus on social media platforms and how these movements and their leaders have managed to portray themselves and their ideas, especially their reactionary ideas, as something that is tolerable, that is palatable and legitimate. And I argue that they managed to rebrand themselves to appear as more moderate or more, less reactionary, less extremist, to kind of appeal to a broader audience. And I would say they managed to do so.
Yeah, I think here in Brazil, the case that we don't talk that much about it because actually people don't know what's going on. And I don't think they see there's a progress going on with the far-right movement.
I just wanted to get a question off so we can contextualize further.
Yeah.
So here in Brazil, we have this kind of misconception where some people see conservative values as being far right. So I would in your research, where do you define conservatism, and where does the far right play into that, and where is there a limit between the just average conservatism, traditional conservatism, and the far right movements nowadays?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question, and I think in to some extent, because of what I was saying earlier, like the ways the far right has managed to kind of blur the boundaries of their extremism and their reactionary ideas. So the boundaries between, conservatism, traditional conservatism, and far right positioning have been blurred, and that has been done deliberately because obviously, like, no one wants to be called far right, so like a far right or an extremist, not far right politicians themselves. So if you tell them, oh, you are far right, they would say, no, I'm not far right, I'm a conservatist, I'm a sovereigntist, I'm a right-wing populist. So they this is part of a strategy. I would say that the main differences, considering what conservatism in a very broad sense is, which is like the protection of values, of like traditional values, whatever you want to understand traditional values, it depends also on the country and the cultural and social background, but like kind of a sort of a closeness towards like a fast or like social change, and again, this is very reductive, but I don't want to expand too much on what is conservatism because it will be another podcast or more than one. I would just say that the far right, what they do is like exacerbating what are the principle of conservatism. So framing the principle of conservatism according to a quite extreme, well, not quite, I would say extreme, ethno-nationalist perspective, which promotes the idea of protecting a country's and its people's identity at all costs, and therefore scapegoating enemies. And there can be a lot of enemies, different enemies in far-right views, but I would say in a very brief and simplistic manner that it's an exacerbation of what are the principles of conservatism.
Yeah, something that I was watching, it was about the rise of these movements in Europe, and precisely in France. And as I was studying, I realized that people actually have this thing of not admitting that they are far right, like they're in favor of that, and they actually put something to not say I'm not far right. It's just like, no, we're fighting for our values, for our traditional values. It's something really common, and something that I was also studying. It was that in France, most of it's like they walk together with racism, like with these new immigrant movements, with this new rise of refugees getting out of war places. And I guess something that I listened in France that I was looking for, it was very, very disrespectful. Disrespectful, pardon. With this immigrant thing. People were like really getting along with it and just like, no, we don't want them here. But they don't say that it's racist, or it's just like strategy to put the far right movement like up. And that's precisely something that I would like to say, that it's incredible how much the youth has been together with it. Like, I think there's some kind of youth and people like our age that is like supporting this kind of movement.
Well, yeah, there are youths. They are able to mobilize and recruit youths, especially if we think at the far right in the United States, which is like the alt-right, the alternative right, which is just another term to define the far right and how it has developed lately in the United States. They are really good at that. They're really good at recruiting youths and especially using memes, using humor, and operating online mainly. But the thing is that the important thing to note is that the online recruitment, the online organization, that gets an offline mobilization. So it's not just online, and it's important to keep in mind this relationship between online and offline, because it has an impact in the offline society, like in the real world. Like, actually, I wouldn't consider the online world in terms of social media not real. It's real as well. But I think what is sometimes underestimated is this capacity to mobilize peoples and groups around an identity, a sense of identity, and around a sense of shared cultural values in the offline dimension. And definitely anti-immigration and racism is one of the core, let's call it value if we can. I don't think it's correct, but to give you an idea, it's one of the core values at the heart of far-right ideologies. Indeed, in terms of ideological definition itself, what the far-right is today, first of all, it's a global movement. It's not just national. It's something that crosses national borders. And wait a moment, I need to look at my notes because it's a complex definition that I want to express well for you to understand. So yeah, like other researchers, not just me, have noticed how globalized this social cultural movement has become. But to define it, It's not that easy because there are many different movements within the far right itself. So it's not just one big movement. There are like lots of different, I would say, currents within the far right. But overall, it's characterized, it's based on, like it's an ideological position based on authoritarian tendencies, with racism and discriminatory ideas at its core. And here I'm citing a colleague of mine, Katie Brown, who provided this definition, which I used for my research. As Katie Brown indeed says, this position, and this is an important point, is usually upheld by a politics of fear. And what do we mean with that? It's a kind of politics, a kind of idea that encompasses various forms of exclusion and targeting different enemies, and especially marginalized groups. I add to this definition, and I think we can see in real time now what's happening around the world, and especially in Western countries, that this position includes, this ideological position includes the promotion of oppressive policies, which are aimed at silencing dissensus and delegitimize human and civil rights. And again, you can see this impact in the offline world, and limit individual freedoms according to a glorification of the, I would say, fallacious idea of security, of national security, and the safety of the country's identity, which promotes a rhetoric of law and order and militarization. So yeah, if we look at the United States right now, I think it's a good example of what is going on and how it translates in the offline dimension.
And how exactly are these far right parties and far right politicians? How are they able to establish voter bases, especially in immigrant communities, that support the anti-immigration rhetoric? Like what you see in Portugal, where a lot of the far right voter base was Brazilian immigrants, or in the U.S., where a large part of anti-immigration supporters were Hispanics. And how exactly do they like mold that narrative so it fits into the migrant community?
Oh, that's a great question, and I have to say I didn't explore much how this type of ideology spreads within first, like second, third generation of immigrants, but it's a very interesting phenomenon, and again, without having explored it too much, what is my idea, and but it would be interesting to expand further, of course, is that it's the result of a system that promotes competition. So I think that it's a system of oppression. Like if you think capitalism and a capitalistic society and how it works, it works on a system, like, or systems, to say, like, to make it plural, of oppression. So, and it emphasizes an idea of competition. So, and fear of, like, I think someone's rights being taken away by someone who comes next. So, as I was mentioning earlier, it's like this politics of fear that they spread, and especially that targets who is coming in terms of anti-immigration policies, for example, and ideas, like it blames the ones who are like coming for the problems and the grievances of the country. Like you hear them addressed as invaders most of the times, especially in Europe, but even in the United States, thinking immigrants that try to cross the border from Mexico, and the way they are dehumanized and, like, blamed for bringing more problems. So I think that there is this dynamic in place, but it's definitely more complex than this. And I hope that even more research is going to be done on this aspect.
Yeah. And would you attribute like some connection between like the rise of these wars in Europe? There's a conflict going on now there. There's a conflict going on there right now, and I would like to know if you see this connection between the rise of the far right movement and the wars.
Well, I'm sorry, I didn't fully understand the question. Like, what war are you talking about?
Like when we see history, we can see like the rise of the Germany with Hitler rising on, and that came through the World War II, just like in Italy with Mussolini. And what I would like to know if you see a connection between this rise of these wars in Europe having some kind of connection with the rise of these movements for some kind of media thing, as you said before.
I think in terms of it's hard to make historical parallelisms because obviously the age when like fascism and Nazism took power, it's a different historical context compared to the one that we are living today. But I think Naomi Klein put it really, really well recently, because we need a historical perspective, because there can be some parallelisms. The main point is not to look at these parallelisms as the exact same thing, the exact same development, because when fascism and Nazism took power, first fascism in Italy, it was after the end of World War One that everything that happened after led to World War Two. Today we didn't, like in our age, we didn't have the same events that brought to the rise of fascism. But as I was mentioning Naomi Klein and how she put it, if I remember the exact words, I was actually watching a reel with an interview that she gave recently, and she said that basically fascisms and like far right authoritarian movements are usually a response of a society to, or actually a response from the ruling class of a certain society to a crisis of their own era. So the crisis of our era, it's different from the crisis compared to the crisis of the 1920s, but is still like a crisis of the system, which is the economic crisis, social crisis. It's something that triggers a system and the crisis of a system and the destabilization of democracy. And this is usually the rise of authoritarianism is a response of the ruling class, let's say, from towards this crisis, to this crisis. So if we frame it like this, we can understand that there are parallelisms between the two, because also fascism grew in a context of crisis, economic, social, like after a war. So yeah, I can't say that these wars are strictly connected, but it's definitely part of a global crisis that we are experiencing.
Yeah. But where are you right now in your search? I would like to know more about your search. What have you actually studied about until now, about Europe, about United States and Latin America?
I've looked at mainly at the connections in terms of aesthetics and propaganda, and obviously ideology as well. And I focused in Latin America. I focused mainly on Brazil, because it's not long since I arrived. I arrived in March, so I don't have a lot of findings so far. But I focused on the propaganda of Bolsonaro, on social media and comparing that with the propaganda of Italian far-right leaders, including especially Matteo Salvini. And I looked at this in comparison with the propaganda of Donald Trump, and what I found is that they use similar strategies, especially for their online communication. In terms of like actual aesthetic strategies, in terms of kind of visual effects, sound bites, memes that they use, obviously according to the context of their countries, but I found very interesting, especially between Salvini and Bolsonaro, the ways that they communicate their image, their self-image to their audience, which is like, there are like interesting parallelisms. For example, both Matteo Salvini and Bolsonaro, I've noticed that they use football t-shirts, or t-shirts. Salvini does that a lot with his favorite team, which is Milan. Don't know if you know the football team, the Italian football team, but usually he also wears other like kind of sports t-shirts, but with written, like printed Italy on top of it, like just to communicate a sense of national unity. And for what I could have seen so far, I've seen that Bolsonaro does exactly the same, which is very interesting. And I also noticed that, for example, still between Salvini and Bolsonaro, they are both called captain, capital in Portuguese, and capitano in Italian. And that's it's another interesting point that I have been discussing in my course with my students. And there might be different reasons in terms of the origins, because I know that Bolsonaro comes from a military background, so it might be different. But I think the sense of being the leader of the people, I think that's the main meaning that they try to communicate through the use of these nicknames. So like I found these interesting elements. And in terms of comparison with Donald Trump, other elements are emerging. They are different compared to Bolsonaro, Salvini, Bolsonaro, Donald Trump. It's a different kind of comparison, but the rhetoric and the discourse that they use, it's very similar, like anti-immigration, targeting marginalized community, anti-feminism, anti-communism. It's all elements that we find in the narratives of these leaders.
Yeah, when you were speaking about this soccer propaganda, I just remember in 2022 election when Bolsonaro got Neymar to do like some kind with his song, because he had a song for his election process, and he like Neymar just did it, some kind of partner with him. I don't know, and he posted the video, and I guess there was a point where people so Neymar is voting Bolsonaro, I guess we should vote it too, something like that, just like a football icon.
Yeah. They use celebrities, and and that's another important point of like in terms of strategies that the far right uses to get the attention, to get the favor of like broader audiences and not just like extremists. It's like exactly using like celebrities who are keen to publicly endorse their ideologies, influencers as well. So it's not just them on their own that are capable to do this, but actually, and this is something that I touch upon in my research as well, and I want to expand in future projects, how actually even like the mainstream media contribute to, communicate this image of far-right ideas and far-right leaders, especially as more moderate or more palatable compared to their reactionary ideas. But the substance doesn't change. They can use different words, softer words, but the rhetoric and the substance of the message is the same if you look better into it, right?
I think it's really interesting. I remember the classes that I was in that you taught, how these far right movements cannibalize on each other, especially like globally. You see, they use the same tactics. They see it work in a different context or a different country, and they try the same. You see that with Trump's security crackdown is just a copy and paste of El Salvador under Nayib Bukele, and it is really concerning because that country became an autocracy. Even though it's a popular movement, it became an autocracy, and you see people. You see how they use the different strategies and methods of other countries, and they just apply it to see what works.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, especially like you said with Bolsonaro and Matteo. What's his name?
Matteo Salvini.
Matteo Salvini. Exactly. Like it really is a global movement.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point, and it shows how global it became. And again, despite I just want to reiterate this point because obviously, if you look at different far right movements, they have their own specificities. For example, in Brazil, and I didn't have the opportunity to delve into this too much, but for what I read so far from other researchers, in Brazil, you don't have the anti-immigration discourse as we have in Europe, or they have in the United States, the far right has in the United States and in Europe. So it's interesting. It's important to keep this in mind. But at the same time, there are some policies, and based on based on authoritarian ideas that apply transnationally. And again, what we are seeing in the United States right now is just the manifestation of this. But even in Europe, like in Italy, for example, has been the European Parliament or Commission commented on the state of democracy in Italy, because there are concerns about the current government, the policies that the current government is applying that are aimed at criminalizing protests and silence dissensus, and that's a very strong signal about the health of a democracy and the risk of, having these authoritarian policies applied. And it's not just in Italy. We've seen in Germany it's happening as well, and to some extent in the United Kingdom, even if there is a Labour government.
Yeah.
And that's another interesting point too.
Yeah, the UK with I think the Labour Party they had to take on the anti-immigration stance just to have a voter base, because even if they wanted to position themselves as an alternative to the Conservative Party, I don't think they would have won, because it's just such a contentious issue in the UK specifically.
Yeah, because it has been like the flag of political discourse, I would say, in general, not just the far right in the past years. And even in Italy, like even leftist governments have been applying and also spread anti-immigrant rhetoric. And yeah, you made a good point. Like currently, actually, like not long ago, a few weeks ago, Keir Starmer said something about the immigration issue in the UK, which again, I don't think it's like even fair to call it an issue, but anyways, he said something like, we risk to become a nation of strangers. And that's far right rhetoric. And you can see how this is like, has become ingrained in the public discourse. And yes, and the labor, or like let's say the left, the moderate left, is appropriating that kind of rhetoric, probably, yeah, to appeal to a base of voters. But that's concerning.
Exactly. And how in your research, how did you what kind of erosions of democratic systems do these far right parties go through, and how exactly do they sweep democracy from under people's feet without them noticing, while they cheer on for it?
As I was mentioning earlier, especially this idea of militarization and law and order rhetoric that they use, I would say it's very powerful, and relies to this politics of fear that I was mentioning, that is part of far-right ideology that criminalizes others. It thrives on the criminalization of the other. And the far right has, like, as I was mentioning earlier, like quite a lot of enemies. So it's not just the immigrants or the refugees, it's also like internal enemies, and especially the government, like leftist governments, left-wing opponents, anyone who opposes their worldview, basically. And how to do it, like, it's just create, like, one of the main point is them creating this sense of enmity and being like with a group that is the in-group, the community of people who are perceived as native and legitimate citizens of the country, and an out group, which can be composed by any enemy that I was mentioning. And like this idea of protecting the in-group from these enemies, and posing themselves as the only solution to the chaos that society, the country, and like its society is going through. This is a very powerful way to justify the implementation of policies that limit civil rights and even like human rights in certain cases, and the census. Like the bills that have been passed in Italy about repressing the census, that kind of sounded the alarm at the European Parliament, are just the product of this rhetoric. So to keep you safe, we are going to strip away from you the rights and the freedom that you have, but you are safe. But which this is like a fallacious idea of safety.
Exactly.
Yeah, but I think this debate is really important, mostly here in Brazil, to make people understand what are the signs of it. Because what do you think, like, if you could say the 5 biggest signs to understand that there is rise in some kind of these far right movements in the government, what would you say?
Well, if we look again at the examples that we mentioned, and let's look at the United States. Maybe I think it's quite effective as an example. Well, you have again, as I said, the repression and the criminalization of dissensus and protests, the use of police violence to repress, as a tool that the state uses to repress to repress dissensus. These are 2 big signs. But also, I would say, like, yeah, this is part of what I was saying, like the arrest and the deportation, but we are at a advanced stage in this sense, about the deportation of citizens on a visa that we have seen in the States recently, for example, because of their participation in protests. It's another. So the erosion of, like the rights of expressing, like freedom of expression and the rights to protest and to criticize the government. Those are like big signs of the affirmation of an autocratic order. But also, I would say, and this is like complicity of, again, the media, the way the media frame the narratives around the current issues. I don't know, like by not calling a spade, like not calling far right people or even far right terrorist attacks that we have seen. No, but not calling them far right terrorist attacks. This is another sign, because it's a way to belittle and minimize what is an urgent problem. Another sign is the rise of racist motivated attacks and far right motivated, white supremacy motivated attacks. That's another sign of, and we have seen this, for example, in the UK last year in 2024, when the anti-immigrant rhetoric was basically used as an excuse after like a very serious crime was committed by a man who murdered three little girls. But because this man, the attacker was, I think was a black person, and I don't know if he's Muslim, but that doesn't matter much. But it has been used by the far right to create social unrest. Yeah. And this has exploded in far right motivated riots that were aimed to target immigrants all over the UK, and there have been news about chats that have been found between these far right groups who were organizing to go and target immigrant communities of immigrants across the UK, and this is dangerous. And when this becomes, like a way to frame how society should or should not look like, and it's weaponized to attack certain groups of people, that's another big sign that we need to do something to contrast this rhetoric.
Yeah, understand. And you guys have any other questions?
I actually just wanted to bring elaborate on what she was talking about. So I looked this up, and there's research from a university in Canada on 32 million tweets from parliamentarians across 26 countries. And the research shows that radical right populism is the strongest predictor of misinformation dissemination.
Oh, that's
so. How these movements thrive on using social media to spread misinformation for political and electoral leverage.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, it's really sad to see that we are given a space for this kind of speech with hate.
Like hate speech is a very powerful form of propaganda used by the far right, by reactionary movements. And this what happened in the UK last year, for example, is again like it gives evidence of how powerful this kind of ideologies are and how they can permeate the public discourse, and how much they can be legitimized. And even I don't remember now titles of newspapers of last year, but I remember there were some, like, quite a lot of critiques towards mainstream media that were moved even by scholars when these riots, like racist-based riots in the UK took place, because the media themselves, they didn't frame it as like far right and hate motivated riots. And as I'll go back to what I was saying earlier. So it's a system, like there is a system that also allows them to communicate their messages in a certain way and to frame these messages as legitimate.
Yeah. Okay, but thank you so much for being here. I guess it was a really productive, like, place where we could talk about it, and thank you so much.
Thank you. It was really great. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and yeah. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. Então, gente, esse foi o nosso episódio de hoje do RELCAST. Eu espero que vocês tenham gostado. Deixe seu like, compartilhe. As nossas redes sociais também estão aqui na descrição. E fiquem à vontade para seguir a gente.
É isso, gente.
Beijo.